I was watching the other day online where these people they put them on DMT, and then they had lasers.
The red laser effect.
Yes. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I just found out about it.
It was like, holy shit! Am I losing my mind?
Oh my God, come on.
I think the mind, a lot of spiritual people kind of think of like the mind as a thing to be overcome. I don't think so. I think the mind is our folded wings. If you want to fly, you gotta connect it to the infinite source. I just say that I'm the guy who discovered that if you project a diffracted laser on the surface and you smoke DMT, you will see what seems to be some kind of a self-executing code in the surface.
I mean, I wonder if you'd be happy to share your experience of what these entities gave you in terms of Jesus Christ.
People think that hell is a punishment, but I think that at this point it's clear to me that hell is essentially the norm.
Don't care what you think, I'ma just do me, and I wanna hear you sing. I got superpowers, superpowers. I got superpowers, superpowers. I got superpowers, superpowers. Working 7 days a week in 24 hours.
Привет, Danny.
Привет, привет.
Как дела?
Нормально? Как у тебя?
Хорошо, спасибо большое. Danny Goler, welcome to the show. Welcome to Become Your Own Superhero.
Thank you so much for having me.
Dude, what I was thinking, because there's plenty of interviews with you explaining what the laser experiment is, right? And what I was more fascinated for my own, and I ask questions that I want to know the answer to myself, which I think other people benefit from. It's more like what's been the evolution of that. So the question, my first question, if you don't mind me asking this, is, Danny, what is the perfect archetype of a father?
I mean, I've had, I don't know if you're referring to, I've had this one interview, I think one of the first ones when I was talking about the ayahuasca ceremony that I had, that I've experienced, kind of like the experience of what is the perfect father or the father archetype. And it was basically someone who allows you to go all the way, at least for a son. I'm sure with the daughter it's a little different. But with the son, the perfect father for a son is someone who gives you all the rope you need to learn everything you need by making all the mistakes you need to make, and go as far as you possibly can, so you can become as much as you possibly can. But when you can go no longer, that's when the ultimate father got you. That's when your dad got you. That's the final hand that will never let you fall beyond a certain point. That was kind of the general overarching image of that, of what that is. Warmth, strength, care, and frame. So a strong frame.
As a new dad, you got a new baby, and congratulations, by the way, to you and your beautiful wife.
Thank you so much.
If you are married.
Married? Yeah.
I think you are, yeah. The relevance of this question is that my wife and I have been trying to make a baby for a long time, really since we've been together. And both of us come from broken homes. And as part of my own healing journey, I had to de-learn a lot of the dysfunctional stuff that I picked up from not having a strong frame, a strong masculine frame in my life in any area. And it's not a blame or a blight on my father, because he didn't get one either. How do you counteract that if you haven't had that experience that you're describing there?
I think just thinking in terms of giving your children everything you never gotten, I think that's really helpful. To me, that's really helpful. I've obviously done a lot of healing myself in my life, but I think ultimately that's my guiding principle. Like, how do I make sure that whatever traumas I've experienced in my life, the buck stops with me, and I don't carry through the traumas into future generations. And sometimes it's easier said than done. I think most of the time it's easier said than done. People pay lip service to this, and they say it really beautifully in a ceremony under a feather with the crackling of a fire, and it sounds really beautiful and profound. But when you're there in the moment and your old shadows come back to play in a moment that is really crucial, it's not that easy all of a sudden, is it? So actually allowing yourself the space of messing up is an important one because you will, and it's just part of the process. But capping it as much as possible and noticing it as much as possible in real time is, to my mind, the trick. And ultimately, just having always the aim towards giving them what you have never gotten. And that includes the stability, the care, the fact that there's always someone there that will always love them no matter what. And establishing that really early on. And I would say also not shying away from any shortcomings that we encounter as we go. So like if all of a sudden there's something that, again, the thing when you talk on a podcast or when you create some kind of a movie to drive a point, it's relatively, I mean, there's mastery there, right? Both in conversation and in creating content that can move people, and that's beautiful and that's important. But just like we know that after the story ends and the narrator said forever, happily forever after, right? Well, no, like life goes on and things happen, and like there's usually no glory in the day to day. And that is something that is very often missing in the deeper understandings of life, because we are moved towards these key moments where, there was a reconciliation or there was like a beautiful moment. Obviously, there's the main uh, events like the birth itself, like the first time the child walked, the first time this, the first time that, the first connection, all of these things, they're special, right? But most life isn't quote unquote special. It just is. And people very often will say, whoa, what do you mean? Like it's still special? Sure. Again, yes. Like if you want to talk about it that way, yes. But all I'm reminding everybody is that in the moment, when there's no cameras, when there's no reciprocation by nobody cares that you're doing this, you just have to kind of do it. When there's no glory in it, that's when you want to put most of your attention on, because that's where most life happens. And I can give specific examples. So, like, very often people will be like, I know it's wrong to look at your phone when you're next to your child. Okay. But all of a sudden you catch yourself doing that. So, like, okay, well then, okay, what do you do? Like, you can pretend you weren't doing it, or you can feel bad about it. None of this would actually do anything moving forward. The only thing that might do something moving forward is just noticing it and going, huh, interesting. Okay, so I guess that's a little bit more out of my control than I realized. All right, maybe I'll put my phone in a different room now. But there's an acknowledgement, acceptance, and this is what I mean by the space for allowing yourself to mess up, because you will, right? And to the core of your question about traumas, the thing with trauma is that just like these little things that you don't really notice or control, with traumas, it's even more so because these are usually accompanied by very strong emotions that you were struggling with your whole life. In at least in Vipassana, in the way that it's taught in Vipassana, which is one form of mindfulness, there's this belief that there's these things they call sankharas, which are just these imprints of happenings in you. And there's the surface ones that are kind of like a line in the water, which if you do this, it just kind of goes away. Then there's the deeper ones, like the line in the sand, where if you do that, then by the end of the day, it will fill itself, like it will just go back to normal, right? But then there's the ones that are like lines in concrete. And those are the ones that you actually want to fully smoothen out if you are moving towards full liberation. And the point there is that as much as you would like to tell yourself all the pretty things about your healing and about all that stuff, these deeper things don't just go away. They require a lifelong work. And one of the things that is important to always acknowledge is not to make them deeper by making you feel shitty for still having these imprints. They are there. Like it's just there, right? But over time, if you don't judge yourself and you allow yourself to go through these motions and just the noticing itself, that's actually a very gentle erosion of these lines. It just kind of sweeps them away slowly. So that'll be my two key points. Aim to give them something you never had, and make sure that you give yourself the room to still heal through the process and not just decide that you'll all of a sudden have to be perfect.
Yeah, and when you're saying give them all the things that they didn't have, it doesn't mean enable them with unlimited wealth just because you grew up poor. I'm guessing it
I
falls
mean,
into that category,
you
right?
can, yeah, of course. I mean, it entails. Look, in the end of the day, it's very small movements, right? It's you can say, yeah, like if you just give them everything, you're essentially setting them up for failure because then they become spoiled. They just expect everything. But I think ultimately, what I mean by that is that give them the thing that we were lacking, even if we think that maybe what we were lacking was physical things. It wasn't that. I think if somebody grows up pretty poor, but they were given ample love and care, and people were always present and they're with them, I don't think they would actually feel the lack. I think that's what I mean. It's the attention, the care, the love, the presence.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And do you feel like you've broken that cycle of generational trauma in your lineage, Danny?
I think I'm working on it. I think just like I think I'm a completely different person in general, child or no child, from like 20 years ago.
Mm.
Um, but with the child, it definitely emphasizes that. The emphasis is very strong. It's like it must be done, or you will carry it through. You will carry on. They will carrying your trauma basically if you don't.
Yeah, it was a bit of a loaded question because in my being, I feel like I've broken that cycle of generational trauma. It's a really interesting certainty. And I may be proven completely wrong, but I don't think so. And I think a lot of that has stemmed from the tremendous amount of work that I've done, which was assisted by plant medicine, which is really the catalyst for how you and I got together. And if people are just dialing in and they're like, Laban, this is you've either got Rasputin or the physical embodiment of Jesus Christ. And if it's not those two, who have you got here?
Two
So
ends of the spectrum.
and I was playing with ChatGPT last night, comparing photos of Rasputin and you, trying to see whether there was any comparison. Because Danny was born in Russia, just in case the folks are curious, and it didn't come up with anything conclusive. But it wouldn't shock me, given what you're involved in and Rasputin's impact on the world as well. So, how do you explain what you do to the layman, and not to be confused with Laban?
I I just say that I'm the guy who discovered that if you project a diffracted laser on the surface, and you smoke DMT, you will see what seems to be some kind of a self-executing code in the surface. That's the shortest outline of what I currently do is.
Would you be able to describe that as the guy that discovered the evidence or the proof that we are in a simulation? Is that an even less complicated? Did I describe that correct?
Less complicated, but it's a lot less accurate because the hints that we live in a simulation is basically everywhere, and you don't need the laser or DMT for that. In fact, I would go as far as to say as actually you can't possibly describe a world in which this is not the case. So it simply not, no matter if you're looking at it through physics or through, this is a simulation no matter how you twist this Rubik's Cube. It doesn't matter. Even if you believe in just the physical world, well, okay, well then the rendering that your brain is doing of whatever this is already a simulation. So that in that regard, it's a simulation. But I think what we mean by that is that there's a higher civilization simulating our space. That's the kind of like the claim in the movie The Matrix. In that regard, I would still say, yeah, you have a lot of evidence it's just that that's the strongest case for explaining everything we understand about the world so far. And I guess I'm the guy, I would say that I made some difference in how concrete you can make that statement through direct observation. So you have a lot of ideas about it. We have theories about it. I'm claiming that what I found is the first actual direct ability to see a layer of whatever pre-buffering layer of our reality is doing in real time with your eyes, just like you can see, an object in the room. So you have direct observational engagement with another layer of reality that we so far only maybe thought in theory may be possible. That would be close to what I would say.
Yeah, and you're very humble, Danny. And I'm not here to blow smoke up your date, as they say, Australia. And I will include the links because there's a number of interviews, really brilliant interviews with Danny being either the guest or on his own show as well, where he goes into a lot of detail. I think really what I was more curious today, I don't want you to regurgitate these stories unless they're really important to you. I'd love to hear more about what's been progressing in your own evolution since this key moment in your life. And because a lot of the themes that you talk about in some of these recent interviews resonate so profoundly, deeply with regards to love, basically the frequency of love being the antidote to the major issues, all of the issues in the world in many cases. And what's been happening since then that has blown your mind further, if that's even possible?
You mean in my whole interaction with that space?
Correct.
I have to be honest, I can't point to something that I would say, okay, I feel like we're close. My whole way of going about it. So when I'm giving an interview and people ask me about things that revolve around what I think all of this means, aside from having some direct experience with the space and collecting some, direct communications with, I guess, what you would call the simulators, I'm borrowing a lot from just my general philosophy in life, things I know, things I practice, and I'm kind of letting these truths that are very far from being new ideas or mine, but these are all universal truths that we all know. And when you walk a certain path, either through meditation or introspection, you start to understand them directly. It's not a theoretical thing. It's more like, okay, I understand why these things are in place. And that's the thing that I'm usually talking about in podcasts if people ask me about, have to do with, the meaning of life and things like this. But the truth is that the thing that started this project the way it started, and the thing that still is animating me every day to go back and work on this, is that I do think that we can engage with it more directly and understand it way more than people realize that we can. I think there's this assumption that people make, and I completely understand it because there's a certain reverence to the sacredness of things. Like, for example, people that are very much in the perception of, the beings and the gods, and like you got to pay your respects and all of that stuff. Very often they're very uncomfortable by the idea of like the simulation. They feel it's almost blasphemous to say things like this. And to my mind, it couldn't have been more the opposite of what is going on. So my personal take is that the world, just like everything else, wants to be understood. It wants to be seen, just like a person would like to be seen and wants to be understood. The world is the same, especially if you believe that the world is conscious, which ironically, very often the people that raise the most issues with that kind of perception of it, like as in the simulation, because I think they think of the simulation like as a very technical, cold, not spiritual kind of element of existence. And again, it's not that I don't understand, but I think that ultimately everything wants to be seen, everything wants to be understood. And I think the assumption behind the reverence part is that if something is advanced enough, it doesn't need your recognition. But what is being missed is that if it is in fact that advanced, okay, maybe you're right and it doesn't necessarily need your recognition, just like you don't need the recognition of an ant. But then it wouldn't need your reverence either. It wouldn't need your attention in that way either, right? So if there's already some relationship that is implied, then the being seen is there. You can't have it both ways. And I think that when we try to understand the world, even from the most kind of scientific perspective, that is to me, that's a divine moment of true understanding of what things really are, what they're really doing. What is it really? That's a question that I think not enough people involve themselves with. They think of things in terms of either descriptions or in terms of, oh, it's just all It's all one. Who knows? So it's either one of these camps. And well, if who knows, then don't even worry about it. And if you only think of it in terms of descriptions, then yeah, then it becomes this just empty, meaningless thing. It's just like, oh, it's color is just the wavelength of the light. No, it isn't. It isn't at all. The wavelength of the light is involved in giving you the perception of that particular color. How it comes about can be descriptive, but the instance of you seeing the color, experiencing what it actually is, the qualia itself, that isn't the wavelength. And no, it also isn't just the way that your brain is crackling in that instance. It's something. It is what it is on its own end. That's that experience of redness is a real thing in existence. And where I sit with this whole thing is that I believe that there are truths that we can start understanding about the world by taking the position that these qualias, these direct experiences, are actually fundamental. They're not secondary. But at the same time, it is also not true that it's all up for grabs. So it's not just like anything can be anything. No, not anything can be anything. You can say that eventually you can give rise to anything that is possible to happen. Okay. But also you can't do it in any order, for example. Right. And all of these points are important. So the reason I'm saying all this is because to your question of what evolved for me that really kind of blew my mind, what would take to do that at this point is some kind of an enormous breakthrough in our understanding collectively, not just personally. People always insist, but did you ever ask what is it telling you personally? And I understand the beautiful gist behind that question, but it is, of course, that's where I started, but it's not what it's trying to say. There's a very big tendency in modern spiritual circles to say like, I mean, your perception is what it is. No, that's the B story. But there's also an A story. There's also the actual thing that is going on. And I'm interested in that actual thing that is going on. So until the moment comes that we have a big breakthrough there, I don't know if there's like another thing that, will blow my noodle to that extent until that happens.
There's a few euphemisms with blowing noodles. The one of oh man, I've been consuming probably about 10 to 12 hours at least of interviews of you and you being a guest and you being the host. And that conversation you had with Zoltan, the lead guitarist or the lead singer of the Five Finger Death Punch, and my wife was like she's got an event next week where they're dressing up as like Greek goddesses with this Russian party, and Russian ladies love to dress up, and it's ladies only. And she's and Zoltan's talking about this creation process, about like manifestation. It's all about becoming the person in order to, right? And this ties in beautifully with what my wife and I do with a program that we put together. We created the idea a few years ago called Purpose Partners for Life. And it's really about teaching people the process on how they can create their dream spouse, right? And it's based exactly off what Anna and I both did before we met each other, and the absolutely miraculous way in which we came together. And I know that the way in which your wife came together was as miraculous as that. And maybe we could talk about in a second. But to get to the point of kind of what I'm talking about here, what practical applications can I take from the stuff that we're learning from the work that you and this community are starting to do now to help me improve my own life, not for the betterment of getting ahead of people, but like leading by example, right? Because I think a lot of people might ask, what can you teach me when you're talking to these entities? What can you teach me to help humanity? And maybe that is a good question, but for me, it'd be like, what can I take from this to elevate myself in order to proliferate that out into the collective consciousness, like the David Hawkins map of consciousness model kind of thing? I don't know where I was kind of going with that, but you're a smart guy. I'll let you handle that.
I don't. The truth is that I'm very open about this. I don't know. I don't know what we learn from it from a practical standpoint so far. And when I'm invited to speak in an event, for example, I can bring my ideas with me, which I think can be fun and something that people can digest and potentially get value from. But directly from the code, I'm making it very clear to people who are organizing events and wants me to come and show people. And I always say, hey, I want to be clear. Like, I don't know what the I don't know what the thing here that that is actually like I can't tell you. I know. Oh, it helps you heal. Like, we don't know that. You would there's all kinds of reactions from people, mostly positive, and people are blown away. But that's not the same as saying, oh, somebody cured their nicotine addiction after 20 years. Like, we don't know that. We don't have data. So just to make it super clear, first of all, I have no idea. But I can tell you, for me, interacting with the realness of it. So like, I occupy a state that seems to bother a lot of scientists, and I also understand it. But I claim to know. I don't claim to think that maybe. I'm saying no. I know for a fact that we are in a computationally random space. I don't. It's not wishful thinking. I definitely don't wish for it. It's not a thing. It's not a preference of mine. I actually had to get comfortable with that idea. I didn't start there. But if the evidence leads you there, that's where the evidence leads, right? And because I'm occupying this state of knowing, and by the way, to be clear, the state of knowing, this is a point worth lingering on. It's not an unmovable state. Like, it can still change. You know something today, and tomorrow you know more or better or differently, right? But there's a difference between thinking that maybe and knowing. There's a certainty that is accompanied by knowing, right? Just like you said with the generational trauma. Like, right now, the state you're occupying is knowing that that is in fact the case. Is it actually the case? Time will tell, and you would feel another way in 5 years than you did now. Maybe better. Maybe you will change your ways again. Who knows? But currently, you know that, right? When you know something like this, it definitely changes something about how to do things, because the scale with which you interact in your mind is different. You no longer think of things in this very local, myopic way. Now, that used to already be my way, but it became so clear. So it's almost like, if somebody has never traveled, right, their perception of their local village, and that's where they spend the majority of their life in, for them, maybe they know cities exist, but it's just kind of like a distant idea. They don't really know what it's like to be in a big city. And when they will go to a big city, it will become overwhelming. But if they spend 10 years living in a big city, they go back home to visit, it all of a sudden becomes like, oh my God, this is like the whole city is like somebody's backyard. It's like, this is like so tiny. This is like, both culturally and by the way, it has nothing to do with better or worse. It's just a completely different scale of operation, because you have to get used to so much information and so many people and all of that stuff. So if you keep pushing this boundary, what scale you're interacting with will dictate what kind of plans you make. So if you only thinking in terms of your village, you will make plans for the next, I don't know, 10, 20 years, where you just kind of think about what your kids are going to do, how you get, you move to a big city. It might involve all kinds of different scales in terms of times. And, scientists, so for example, physicists, think of the universe as a very tangible thing. They don't think of the universe as a thing out there. They're like, they kind of, they really imagine themselves there with it. Like, it's right here. This is what we're doing. Something that my wife pointed out to me, she said, when you talk about physics, like, to you, it seems like it's very salient. It's very real. To me, when you're saying it, it's just some idea. Like, I don't know, a galaxy. I have no idea. Like, and it has nothing to do with being smarter or dumb. My wife is like one of the smartest people I've ever met, but she just never, she's a biology person. She's like right here, but in the same way, when she talks about biology to me, just, even though I kind of understand like some things, it's not as clear. the scale with which she operates in her mind is different. So the scale that I'm not interacting with in my mind, not philosophically, but actually, is one of ultimate reality. And that definitely puts things in perspective, because you start to all of a sudden interact with what I guess most people would consider religious ideas, but you interact with them seriously. Just like you would interact with something like, hey, I have to deal with this bill that I have to pay next week. So it becomes very real for you. That definitely becomes more of a real operational object in my mind's eye that I have to deal with on a regular basis. Like, what does it all mean ultimately if there is this software that is doing something? So it was created for a reason. So what we do actually matters in a lot bigger ways than we realize. And it's not like it's all up for us, but what we do matters a lot more than we realize. How we talk to other people, how we operate as human beings, all of these things, they have implications way vaster than ourselves. And that becomes very salient. I think for me, that definitely can say that changed. Will it be the same for everybody across the board that interact with the code? I don't know. I don't want to claim to know, but I definitely had people that experience I've seen very often. Actually, it's in most cases when people fully see it, there's a shedding of the mask that even the person didn't realize they have on. Because even if they're if they're skeptical, obviously, if they all of a sudden see it, there is this kind of radical shift. They go, oh, like they're really they didn't expect to see it. But even if they're totally into it, which actually to me was more revealing, because when people are totally into it, they're usually into all the other things. Like they like weird, they like, alternative thought, they like UFOs, they like spirits, they like 5D, they like all of these things. No mainstream science for them. But if they're into it, there's an enthusiasm. I don't even think people realize, but it is a form of a mask. It's an act. It's an act. It's more like, dude, that's like, dude, it's an act. But when they all of a sudden see it, the act drops. That's what you see in the trailer. People just go, that's real. That there's no more mask. There's like, oh, you mean for real, for real? Oh, I didn't expect it to be for real, for real. I like talking about it, but I didn't realize I'm going to be in the face of it. That does something. I can tell you. That definitely does something there. That I think integration is a very important part right after that, because it is a bit of an ontological blow for people.
There's a couple of things, Danny, that come to me. Just going back to the that feeling of like the knowing. It really comes from a place of two things. I don't ever want to find myself in a scenario where I've witnessed a lot of really successful motivational speakers and icons of personal development. And I'm not here to judge, by the way. These observations, I've got to spend time with them and got to know some of them, where they have ended up losing sight of the very thing that they were focused on in the early days. And they're out of integrity, out of alignment with practicing what they preach. I'm creating a life where I'm not going to be tied to an ideology or an agenda, right? That for me, because I love being pulled from pillar to post, learning about the stuff. My first ever experience with even hearing about DMT was probably 10 years ago with a former friend of mine, let's call him, who used to smoke it recreationally. And I was like, whoa, like, that's crazy. And then in a conversation I had this morning with a friend of mine who's a filmmaker in LA, he's like, he was at the same level I was 10 years ago. He's like, whoa, he's never even really smoked marijuana, I don't think. And I was just explaining to him about how DMT naturally exists in nature, and maybe a good place to bring in you now, Danny, is just explaining what DMT, in the context of what you're talking about, what it is and where it comes from.
Where it comes from is we don't really know, exactly the full function of it in organisms. We do know that it exists in many organisms. I don't know if we know that it exists in all organisms. It would be an interesting question to ask. Precursors definitely exist, but it's a very simple molecule. Our body makes it. Our body makes both N-DMT and 5-MeO-DMT. mostly produced by the lungs, not the pineal gland, as many people believe. But it's essentially a neuromodulator. I used to say neurotransmitter, and that was corrected by Andrew Gallimore, that it is not a neurotransmitter, because a neurotransmitter has to answer to very particular criteria, and it isn't that. But it is a neuromodulator for sure. So it definitely influences networks to do this or that, but not as directly as neurotransmitters do. It is weird that it exists, that our body makes it. It is extra interesting that we don't really know, as far as I know today, and I'm always open to being corrected, but as far as I know from all the neuroscientists that I've spoken about this, we don't really know what its function is in our metabolism, which is strange because it seems that there's some hints that we used to think that we only have trace amounts of DMT, stands for dimethyltryptamine. And we used to think we only have trace amounts of it in our system at any given moment. But our body pumps a lot of it when we dream and right before we die, and some people think right when we're born. This might pop some people's bubbles, but we actually don't know any of this, just to be clear. We don't know that there's more DMT in your system when you dream. We don't know that it happens when you die. We don't know whether it happens when you're born. And if you think about it for 2 seconds, the reason we don't know is because how do you measure that? Like you gotta just happen to be plugging somebody in right before they cross, and then just measure their exact levels. There's no other way to know, right? So we don't know this. But what's interesting is that Dr. John Dean a few years ago discovered that there might be evidence actually in the other direction, which is that it's not that we usually have trace amounts and then more in certain key instances. There you go. But it's that we have more of it in our day-to-day waking life than we ever realized. He studied it with rats, I believe. In terms of primates, they're very similar to our chemistry. And what he discovered, that at least in rats, I think it was rats. It was either mice or rats, but I think it's rats. They have comparable amounts of dimethyltryptamine in their intracranial liquid as dopamine and serotonin. In fact, exactly in between. So if you have this amount of serotonin average in a day and this amount of dopamine, right in between them sits how much DMT you have in intracranial liquid every day on waking hours, which means you have substantial amounts in your system. So what is it responsible for? We don't know. One of his theories that it's possible that it kind of modulates what qualia is in general, so like perception itself, and maybe the perturbations with all the other substances, the way that they cause your hallucinations is by perturbing the dimethyltryptamine system, actually, because it basically creates tilts and angles and different topologies in your perceptual architecture. Now, all of this is highly speculative. I asked Andrew Gallimore about it. He said, he's a computational neuropharmacologist, and he's considered to be one of the biggest world experts on this topic. And he kind of went, I don't know, like it's a little wonky. So, but there's a lot of competing ideas. It's a very long-winded way of saying we don't know what it does. It is interesting, though, that it is in every living system almost, and we don't really know what role it plays. And we have probably substantial amounts of it every moment that we're alive, which is interesting because the body doesn't just do that. The body doesn't produce something, especially the brain. The brain doesn't usually, intake anything that takes too much energy because it really, really is good about preserving energy. So that's what we know about it, that it's a form of neuromodulator. And when you smoke a lot of it, you seem to be propelled into another dimension, not philosophically or theoretically, but like actually, like it really feels like you're going to another dimension of some sort.
There was a scenario, Danny, and I thank you for sharing that. By the way, I understand a lot of these questions, like, what's the meaning of life kind of thing. I inextricably started running out of the blue in 2018. I went from 5 kilometers, 3 miles, to 60 miles in 16 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah, and there was a number of things that had happened in my health and the work that I was doing on myself and adopting a carnivore diet. So I was very fat adapted, and at about the 7 to 8 mile mark, for about 2 years, I used to inextricably burst into tears of joy. And it wasn't sorrow, it was like a release. And I often hypothesize, and I've spoken to a number of brilliant people that I've interviewed and just in passing about what they think it was. And I thought it might have been stored trauma, which was in the fat, that because I was ketogenic and fat adapted, that I was releasing it through that process. But I wonder, as my pace got faster and faster, because I was running at sub 3 hour marathon pace after a not a very long period of time, which, to give you an idea, if people are curious, like less than 3% of marathon runners ever run at a sub 3 hour marathon pace, by the
What
way,
is that?
right?
What is that pace, by the way? Can you please in miles, because I've been in America for too long. So what is it?
So,
6.5, 6.7 per hour?
I'll just have to rely on ChatGPT. I think it's around about 6.5 or 7, but we'll find out in a second.
Yeah, because it's interesting you're saying this, because I started running. Well, I used to run for other things, but like I recently, maybe 2 years ago, started running like seriously, like 5 times a week, and I never got to like 16 miles. It's like too long, I guess, for me, in terms of like time in a day. But yeah, I got to like I think the longest I run is like 9 miles or 10 miles, and it takes me about an hour and a half. So I guess I'm there, but keeping it up for what is like 4 or 5 hours, right, to get to a full marathon, probably.
Well, so my first marathon, which I did in 2018, which was 2 weeks. So I went from 5 kilometers, so 3 miles, to 26 in 14 days.
That's
And
bananas.
right, and I ran. I didn't come from a history of running. I'd never been a runner. 5 kilometers or 3 miles was the furthest I'd ever run, and I would have gone fast. So I did it in 3 hours 56. So I
Whoa.
think it's 40% of marathon runners go under 4 hours, and
What is it? Is it 26 miles?
26.2 miles. Give
Okay.
me the usual stats. So it's about 8.73 miles an hour to hit a
Wow.
3 hour marathon, right? And after a period of about 2, I wish I'd documented this better, but it stopped. I didn't need to release that anymore. And I shifted 60 pounds of body fat over 2 years, Danny, and put on 30 pounds of lean muscle, verified through DEXA scans. And I've been tracking all my data. I've always been pretty rigid with medical stuff because I had a number of autoimmune issues. And so I'd been tracking all this stuff. And I was always fascinated to know, and I just wondered, now that you're talking about DMT being located in the lungs, whether there was a DMT release. Because maybe you can answer this. The question would be is like, what are the symptoms, if that's the right explanation, of experiencing DMT release?
I don't know if it would be enough to create any effect, because the amounts that your body produces is just not. It's the reason that you. Okay, so there's a few things. First of all, there's a couple of things I really wanted to ask you because it's fascinating to me, and I'll tell you why in a moment. I'm asking. The first thing is, I'm not gonna forget what you asked. The first thing is, when did you say it was happening? The release, like at what mile mark
So
or time mark?
10 to 12 kilometers, so like 7 to 8 miles
7,
in,
8
right?
miles. Okay,
Yeah.
and then would you like? So you just like started like weeping out of joy while you're running, and you kept on running. How long did that last every time it would happen?
I don't remember it being super duper long, maybe a couple of minutes.
Okay,
People must have
so
looked at me thinking I was nuts.
well, listen. Obviously we don't know, right? But okay. So here's the thing: the reason that, for example, if you take a bag of DMT and you swallow it, nothing happens. If you smoke it, you will never be the same again, right? And that's because your body literally specializes in metabolizing it. It metabolizes it so fast that if you just put it to your stomach, there's no way you're going to feel an effect, because the speed with which your body processes it, it will never reach the brain. It will never give your brain this extra that it needs to experience this moreness of reality. So that's why you have to override it and you have to smoke it, because then you immediately get it directly into the brain, right? And even then, it subsides after 5 minutes, right? That's why it's considered to be such a fast-acting thing. This is why that's what they do in ayahuasca. They basically coat it with MAOIs that it's a form of an enzyme. Well, it does a few things, but one of the things it does, it basically suppresses the enzyme that digests DMT that quickly, and then you can actually feel the effects in the brain because it's not digested as fast. Basically, it's not metabolized as fast. Which, by the way, is also one of the reasons you also have to do the dieta, because the same substance, the same molecule, also suppresses the modulators of the enzymes in your gut that control the vicissitude of sugars and salts. So if you don't have that enzyme active, your blood pressure can shoot through the roof. That's why you have to only eat certain particular foods, because otherwise it becomes dangerous. So I'm saying all this is because the chances that there's a release that is big enough, like a pocket that is deposited is big enough that can cause like an effect like this, I would say is slim to none. But I don't know. I mean, maybe there's like a 5-MeO release. To me, it sounds more like you release something. There's a trauma stored in the body in many places. It wouldn't just be stored in fat. It would be stored mostly actually probably in your muscle tissue. There's a certain threshold you hit, and it just releases that. Just like when you stimulate the vagus nerve, just like you know, all of that stuff. And there's another interesting component, because specifically with running, are you familiar with the phenomena of flow?
Yes.
Right. So the whole thing with flow, and to anybody who doesn't know, that's a technical term. It's some people refer to it as being in the zone. So that's not just a kind of, like a hearsay kind of thing. No, that's a real brain state that we can measure. And what's interesting, they discovered that there are heart rates, specific heart rates, that are associated with entering flow easier. So I think it's between 140 and 160 beats per minute for a certain period of time, and then the brain becomes very ripe for entering flow states. And flow states are known to be feeling very pleasant, and you just become the task. You just and there's degrees of this, right? And
Have a guess at
the
what my
runner's high
average. Sorry,
is
jump
140 to
in.
160. No, yeah. So it's 140 to 160.
It was about 150.
There you go, smack in the middle. So what is possible is that you entered flow, which we know, aside from all the stuff that athletes report, which I'm sure you're no stranger to. You've experienced probably many and they don't know. By the way, this is an interesting little. That's a way to kind of for running nerds, but they're not sure that runners glow or runners high is the same as flow. They're not sure they're the same brain states, by the way. But it's possible that because flow is a very particular pattern that happens. It's not just one thing. It's many things at once, and they happen in a particular order. There's a whole science to it. The more dangerous the task, the easier it is to enter flow. That's probably because the brain goes, oh, I don't have a choice. I either enter flow or I die. So it's no-brainer, right? And the heartbeat thing, which usually is associated with each other too. So I wonder if it's possible that. So what I was saying is that aside from knowing all the stuff that people report about it, we don't really know what flow is. We know that the DMN, the default mode network, gets reduced a lot. So there's less perception of the self. There's more just kind of you just become the wind, so to speak. You just become the world. But it's possible that you would basically enter a state of more fundamental cognition of existence itself, versus being the form that we are. And if that's the case, just like in deep meditative states, just like in many other forms of healing methods and techniques, it's possible that's the thing that releases all the trauma from your body. But I'm just pure guessing here. I don't really know. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? And there's one other component. In the ketone molecule, there's alpha hydroxybutyrate is one of the components of a ketone molecule, right? Which is, I think, bioidentical to gamma hydroxy, GHB, the sexual assault drug, for lack of a better word, right? Is there a better way to describe it that I can not get cancelled for?
It used to be legal just as a supplement for bodybuilders.
Yes, and
Because
marital
assault.
aid.
Yeah.
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 And so I wonder, because I was fat adapted.
So it went from salt to assault. No man.
Yeah, yeah. Like that makes sense that my body was producing a lot of that, because I've self-experimented a lot. I ran a 30-mile in 2021 in July as an experiment monitored by Professor Peter Bruckner, who's one of the top sports medicine doctors on the planet here in Australia, and measured my blood sugar and ketone levels through the whole journey. And he monitored me, and all I had was a ribeye, about a 2-pound ribeye, about an hour and a half before the race, about half a gallon of homemade bone broth that had liver and spleen cooked into it, 9 slices of Jarlsberg cheese, which is that cheese with kind of holes in it, and about 10,000 milligrams, 10 teaspoons of sodium, potassium and magnesium in those Element brand salt sachets, nothing else. And when I finished, my ketone levels were 2.2 millimole, which was the equivalent to where I would be in a deep 3-day water fast. And my blood sugar was 3.3, which is the lowest that the machine goes. Now, any uneducated person on blood sugar would have sent me straight to the ER saying you're going to die of hypoglycemia. But I felt awesome, and my recovery was about 3x faster than any similar level runs. So there's some interesting things that have gone on. And then another final thing that I'll add to that, during COVID, in the early stages of COVID, I did purely beef, water, and black coffee for 30 days. And after about, I don't know, a week, I developed this like non-sexual orgasmic radiation out of my gut.
Wow.
And I still can't describe what that is. And I know a lot of the, norepinephrine, dopamine, I don't know enough about this stuff to be accurate, but like a lot of the feel-good chemicals that the body create are in the gut, 85, 90% of them, right? So something was going on. But I say all this to say that, like, I feel like this has been integral in my healing journey, my spirituality, and then doing a powerful penis envy psilocybin journey in 2022, which we spoke about when we first met, that gifted me the certainty of there being something else out there. And my approach to spirituality and Christ and trying to live in integrity has just exploded as a result. And it doesn't feel nefarious at all, which is what some people think. So, I wonder if you'd be happy to share your experience of what these entities gave you in terms of Jesus Christ, because there'll be a few people that are Christians and religiously focused here that'll be going, I'm not sure about this dude.
So before touching on Jesus, one thing I do want to say after everything you expressed, one of the biggest bridges that I think that we can offer to link between the perception that everything is just kind of a result of physical events and everything being just in terms of energy centers. Notice that everything you described can be expressed in both languages, and they will both be fully coherent. You can say everything you said and attach all the scientific names to the molecules and what they did and where they're concentrated and what happens then. Or you can say, well, you opened your center, like you said, you opened your energetic centers. They both make sense. So which one is correct? Well, you can easily say that they're both correct. They're just the same description. Yeah, the two different descriptions of the same event. You can say that there are these energetic channels, but the way they manifest themselves in physical world is through physical events. So they would manifest as these molecules doing this, doing that, but the channel goes deeper than just the molecules. There's something is animating the process from behind that is much deeper than just the physical body. And I think that's a very important distinction that we have to make, that you can speak these two languages, but they're not necessarily competing with one another. They're actually completing the picture, to my mind. And there was one other thing I wanted to say. First of all, let me just say that this is extraordinary. This is super impressive and crazy. I'm sure you're familiar with the whole story with Eddie Izzard and how he ran the marathons, right? that he never ran a marathon in his life, and then he just decided to start running them, and he ran like 30 in a row, like 30 days in a row. He ran a marathon every single day, and the doctors told him like, "Hey, you got to stop, and like you're gonna die." And he's like, "No," and they kept on going. And actually, they did take him to a doctor, and he told him like, "No, you're gonna stop now." After the first time, it was like 28, and then he ran, if I'm not mistaken, like 50 of them in a row. So like 50 days in a row, he ran a marathon every single day, and he just wanted to show that even though he's just a comedian, or just he's his extraordinary element as a performer, as is the fact that he knows it's all in your head. So he wanted to show that, hey, I never ran in my life, but I can do this every day because it was for charity, right? So the cause is good enough. And he just like, hey, as long as my feet carry me, I can keep going. Like yeah. And I think there's something there that is very often overlooked, because it's true that in the instance of the moment, we want to be able to address the physical issues. But I think that if we don't address these deeper components, what we would call spiritual, we would be essentially just putting a Band-Aid on whatever it is. You're not actually fixing it. Like, you have to address the deeper cause. And I do believe that everything that happened to you, and I'm sure you believe very similar thing, it's not that just you maybe think it just came to you out of nowhere to start running, but it didn't. There's something in you that knew. There's some communication that came. Is like, start doing this, because this physical process of doing this task you guys call running will have all the components in it to help you release, get in shape, be more attuned, focus. All the stuff that you need would come to you through this one task. Which, by the way, if you really want to get extravagant, there's different paths towards spirituality. One of the big ones is devotion. And devotion can be to a god, but devotion can also be to something you show up for every day, or a person, or a task, or a practice. Or devotion is the thing that does the work, because by devotion, it's an attitude towards commitment, um, determination, like all the things, right? It just pushes your mind towards this. It's not just commitment. It's not just loving no. Devotion is a very particular state of mind, and I think what you devoted yourself to doing it, and that basically what brought everything together to fruition in this beautiful bundle that we all experience as the awakening, and to you it came in this way.
Yeah, you just reminded me. I remember what triggered this, Danny, and it
Tell
was
me.
a text message that I sent to my mother, forgiving her for all that she had done to me. And I
Wow.
didn't, and I even write about this in my book. I think I was able to transcribe the actual text message. And the moment that I hit send on the message, because my mum and I had a very dysfunctional relationship for years, all right? For years and years and years. And, she went through an unimaginably challenging childhood. And, I love and I forgive my mum and my father. And that was a part of that journey. But I remember when I hit send on that message, Danny, I burst into the most guttural weeping that I've ever experienced in my life. And it was later that day that I did my first big run. It was like, I don't really know how to describe it, but it was like,
Have you ever done anything physical before? Like, were you physically active before in some other form?
I mean, I've played sport, never at a competitive level. I played cricket and I played rugby when I was younger and stuff, but I'd never, not anything super challenging, none of that
Interesting.
stuff. Never competitive. I was mediocre at everything my entire life, Danny. And that started that journey of actually leaning into what my highest excitement has been and is becoming and evolving, where I feel like I'm truly world class at these certain things. And but yet, I believe that I'm humbled enough times to know that there's still a long way to go. And I didn't mean to rush you through into that other question about Christ, because there's plenty of
No,
time
no,
to get
it's
to that. But
sure.
just in your own experience, like, I loved hearing how your sciatica, the back issue you had.
Yeah, that was a big one. That was when I knew for a fact that it was all psychosomatic. I struggled with sciatica for I don't know how long, maybe 15, 20 years. And I went to the doctor and they did an MRI and they're like, yep, you're L3 and L5 fully herniated. No more liquid in your vertebrae. So like it's calcifying now. And that's it. That's pretty much surgery and physical therapy maybe, but that's not really going to make any difference over time. And they just prescribe morphine to me because once every few months I couldn't walk for like a week. I don't know if you ever had sciatica, but the worst thing about it is that there's nowhere to hide. Like it doesn't matter if you sit down, stand, sit, crouch, you can lay down. It doesn't matter. Like if it's inflamed, it's almost like a super taut guitar string that just doesn't let go, and it's exactly at the wrong length. Like it's exactly at the wrong place, and you're like, like it doesn't matter what you do, you can't stay in one position for too long. It's excruciating. It really made me appreciate more what it means to live without pain. Like if you live without pain, it is such a blessing. Like people that are suffering from chronic conditions, I'm like, dude, people sometimes by the way, like that show, Dr. House, right? It's so like it nails they just nail it because people are like, oh, why is this person such an asshole? Whomever it is, right? You have no idea. You have no idea what people are experiencing on a regular basis, like in their bodies, like they're just living with something, right? It can be psychological, it can be physical. And one day I just couldn't sleep, and I got up in the middle of the night and I just pulled the bookshelf off the wall, and my physical body was doing it, but I wasn't really doing it. It was just kind of felt like something was moving through me, but not like possession or anything like this. It just felt kind of like brushing my teeth. It just felt very normal. There was no resistance to it. And in 3 days, I didn't sleep. I packed my entire house, put it in bags, drove to the landfill, threw away everything I owned. I have this on video. I threw away everything I owned. Didn't sell it, didn't store it, just put all in the trash, including brand new flat screen TVs, a giant mahogany table. I had like everything. And I'm coming back home. I'm seeing this empty apartment. I realized I didn't really have a plan or anything. And it all of a sudden hit me. First of all, I realized what I did, which was wild. But also, I realized I have no more pain. The pain was gone. And it never came back. Like, it never came back. And at that moment, I knew, oh my God, this is like, it's purely in your mind. Like, yes, you have the physical things that happen in your brain kind of convinces you that's the reason, but you can just turn it off. Like if you don't believe in it, literally you just turn it off. Like there's something in my body that was screaming at me, and when I did the right thing, it just let it go, and there was no more issue there.
People are going to have a hard time believing that, and I don't care because through my wife, and I appreciate you sharing that, Danny, during ectopic pregnancy that nearly killed her in 2019. They misdiagnosed her and she nearly bled to death in a first world country in Australia, right? And the pain that she endured before they realized that there was an issue with the blood accumulating in her thing, the amount of pain she was in was just unbelievable. She's since gone on to become an incredible hypnotherapist and can now hypnotize herself to deal with subsequent issues and without taking any medication to some extent, right? And I'm curious to know if you've come to any kind of understanding or best guess about, like, as a practical application for other people dealing with chronic pain, like what you think they might be able to investigate that could give them that peace. Have you got any insights?
Very reluctant to do that. I think your body speaks to you, but I think for everybody it's very different. I think it's not. I am by no means saying you should not visit a Western doctor if you have a serious issue. I am saying, however, that it's clear to me that there's definitely parts of your brain that you can communicate with that can turn off any pain that you experience. And they even do this, by the way. There's people whose job it is to basically talk you out of pain before serious dental procedures. without any lidocaine, without anything. They just like convince you that it doesn't hurt, and then it doesn't hurt. Look it up. Like that's a real thing.
What's their title? What do they call themselves?
I don't know. Let's look it up.
It's fascinating. A lot of this comes from while you're doing that, exhausting all the traditional allopathic medical systems. By the way, I got a dear friend of Anna and I who live in Utah who had a botched tooth extraction and has that trimyalgia condition, which is, I think they call it like, it's the pain is so severe that the amount of people that unalive themselves after dealing with it is like in the very high percentages. It's so crippling, and they're trying all kinds of different things, and it's improving through, I think they're using psilocybin. I think I want to say like medical grade MDMA. I think maybe some ketamine therapy. There's a number of plant medicine things going in there, and massive improvements. So yeah, let me know when you found that.
Yeah, I'm just looking at ChatGPT right now because the way you have to kind of word the question a certain way. Particular fascinating group of people, those who influence others to reduce the eliminate fear and pain perception before dental procedures. There are a few categories of people who do this depending on the context and intent. I guess clinical hypnotists, medical hypnotherapists, professionals use hypnosis to reduce, even eliminate pain perception. Dental anxiety coaches, therapists include psychologists, CBT therapists, and even life coaches. Dentists with exceptional bedside manner. My ChatGPT is great. Some dentists are extremely skilled at using verbal suggestion, calm demeanor, and gentle body language to lower the patient's perception of coming pain. That's amazing. That is very funny. Yeah, but mindfulness trainers, so I guess it's a whole thing. But I guess the main thing that I saw a whole story about it. I guess it was definitely like a hypnotherapy. But there was not, nothing like they just literally have a conversation with people. And I guess that can also be a form of hypnosis, but basically that's what they do. The point is that there's definitely a way to do it directly from the brain without actually touching anything in the body. But it requires some doing, understanding, and so is there a hack there? I'm sure there's one. I don't know what it is. I do know for a fact though that it's real. But if that would never happen to me, and the story I just told you would be told to me by someone else, I'm not sure I would buy it. Like, you have to experience it for yourself to believe that that's in fact the case.
Well, I think Joe Dispenza is a great example for those who don't know. Like he was horribly broken and had his back broken years ago as a cyclist, and broke his back, was told he's never going to walk again, and then healed himself through meditation. And the Silver Method meditation stuff is the stuff that I love using with the binaural, hemisync, whatever you want to call it, which has been a game changer for me. It makes a lot of sense why a lot of these, there's no one size fits all with it. But I think the point is just to be open-minded to the fact that there is an alternative that doesn't involve surgery and bloody, because I think I might have shared this with you. My wife, in this process of like trying to make a baby, because of the challenges, and I've spoken about this before, we've had 20 miscarriages, right? 4 of those were ectopics. You kind of get to a point where you're like, we need to try something different. And she did a hard dry fast for 4 days 2 years ago or so, which is no water contact or food for 4 days, 96 hours. And in that time, regrew back her uterine wall, which is unheard of, from 3 mil to 12 or 14 millimeters, whatever it was, verified through the scan that they did.
That's crazy.
And it's like, at least if you share this information from a place of like, hey, just, I'm not giving you the medical advice, but just like, maybe there's a way that you don't have to get life-altering back surgery. You can try to do something different, and that's my whole perception or belief system on this.
Yeah, you obviously want to, do these things carefully. But yeah, things like fasts, they're known to be very effective, and sometimes to miraculous degrees. That is true. And that means that, and by the way, just to make it very clear, even from a scientific perspective, even if you have one case of this happening, that already should be interesting, because that means it's possible. So if you previously thought something was impossible, and now you've shown that even one time it worked, well, now you're obligated to look into exactly why it worked. And if it was a one-off, then why was this one a one-off, and why can't it happen again? What is the mechanism by which it did happen? Because if it did, it did. Like, you can't go around that fact, right? And that to me is something that very often is overlooked from a scientific perspective, because science only tries to take things in through statistical analysis. We're like, well, how many cases of this actually occurring happen? Who cares? If it happened once, you're now obligated to try and figure out exactly how it happened. So I'm fully on board with this. But I think ultimately, from a personal perception, the only general thing I can say about it is awareness. Always paying attention to the body. The body is always speaking. The body is always telling you something. These crazy cases of women that are so obese and they don't even know that they're pregnant until they literally are going to labor, and then they only then discover they were pregnant. I mean, people think it has to do with it. No, that's real. That
I
we
know, I
asked
know,
her.
I know.
It's like, and I thought it was like maybe a case or two. No, that's like a real thing. This is like dozens of women every year that this happens to them. And to me, the thing that stands out more about it than it's not even just their weight. Imagine how disconnected from your body you have to be to not realize that. Like, it's not just like, what do you think it was? Like gas? Like, how unconnected. They're truly like,
I
I
know.
mean this sincerely. Like, how not aware are you with what is usually going on with you, that you can overlook something like this for 9 months, right? And that is just one extreme example, but it's an example of people just not really noticing, not paying attention to what the body is constantly telling them. And I was definitely one of these people. Like, I was constantly ignoring, oh, I'm just going to plow through it. I'm just going to do whatever because you don't believe it's possible.
I think a lot of it comes down to, from my own personal experience, Danny, like going through this full transformation is really no better way to describe what I've gone through, right? The complete and utter elimination of addiction, of very destructive things, alcohol, recreational drug abuse, gambling, sex, porn, negative self-talk, autoimmune disease, and blah, blah, blah. And I think about the things that I used to eat, right? If I ate that same thing now, I would like if I eat gluten these days, even if it's organic sourdough, if I have a large enough couple of slices of toast potentially, right? And I do check this every 6 months because I love it. But I'm like, I get mental health. It massively affects my mental health.
Yep.
And I used to eat loaves of this stuff every week, right? And some people say, oh, you've become intolerant to it. And I disagree. I think it's a sensitivity. So my attuneness to people, and I can slight body language, and I can read people infinitely better than what I used to. And it makes sense when you start to eliminate all of the inflammatory response in the body, when you're cleaning up, getting rid of seed oils and poison food and that kind of thing, getting rid of the fluoride that's in the water, which stupefies people scientifically, reduces IQ points, and because it affects the bloody pineal gland, and there's all these other things. So my attentiveness to this in my own personal journey has infinitely improved. So where that being pregnant without knowing it, if I was a woman, would be like, you kidding me? But I get it, and I have a lot of empathy for people that are at that level of numbness. Like, 'cause what else are they missing out on? Are they entering into a relationship or going down an alley that's going to lead to their demise? Like, their ability to pick up on spidey senses and all these other things is just completely haywire. Am I on the right track there, you think?
Yeah. I think we constantly ignore a lot of signals that if we just pay attention to those, we would live a much more balanced life. I think that we are uniquely gifted, a uniquely gifted species, that because the gift is so powerful, we forgot to put it in context and with balance with everything else. The mind should serve the greater good. The mind is an incredible tool. They gave us incredible abilities and will keep doing that. But it always has a cap in how much it can advance if it's not put into the harmonious structure of everything else that is going on around us. Because if we don't do that, then it just becomes for kind of like internally self-feeding kind of thing. And that's the thing that, is equivalent to cancer. But if you put it into the infinite growth machine, so to speak, or the organic continuum of nature, then the mind can draw from an infinite energy source, and it can expand into infinity forever, into space and beyond, inner space, outer space, and it would spread its wings, so to speak. I think the mind, a lot of spiritual people kind of think of like the mind as a thing to be overcome. I don't think so. I think the mind is our folded wings, and we kind of flap them around a little bit here, and we just take off and land after a few meters, but that's about it. If you want to fly, you gotta connect it to the infinite source, and then it opens into what it's supposed to be. That's how I view what we're supposed to be doing. And under that, paying attention to everything that you're a part of, the ecosystem and everything else, is an enormous component of placing yourself in this harmonious thing. The problem isn't the human mind. The problem is how it's being utilized. So you can utilize the human mind to do extraordinary things the second you check in with nature and say, hey, what do we need? Nature would go, oh, the sun is blowing up to 5% of its original size. We got to start working on how do we take all the other life forms and move them somewhere else. No problem. We're on it. That's how we should be looking at ourselves, as the custodians of the actuation of the force of nature called knowledge. It's a sacred force. And if it's given to a species that becomes infatuated, they eat themselves alive. That's exactly what happens. It's not the mind isn't the problem. If you connect to that deeper voice, the mind will create enormous, beautiful structure that will unfold forever. That is the divine plan, the way that I see it.
It's beautiful, beautiful, Danny. And speaking of divine, to close up the loop on the question about Christ, because I can imagine people they're fearful to approach the subject of what you've discovered or helped discover, however you want to label it, because it might disprove, Christ. Like that episode of The Simpsons when Homer becomes really smart and disproves the existence of God, and then Flanders eats the thing. Would you mind educating us on that?
Yeah, so you're referring to a very particular vision that I've had, and I always have to give the disclaimer that I'm not claiming to some universal truths about existence, and yet it was presented to me as being the ultimate picture of everything. And if what is comfortable for people is that, well, that's just, that's yours, sure, no problem. But what I'm sharing is, I believe, has to do with kind of like the ultimate picture of things. So what I was shown, which was very surprising to me, is that, so the reason it was surprising to me is because that was not part of my regular motif space. I don't really have that humming on my hard drive. It's not a thing that I ever considered. Jesus Christ to me, was just a way of thinking, philosophy, a belief system. It never even occurred to me that Christ maybe even existed as a person, to be quite honest. So like people say, well, no, the evidence for Christ, the person, is irrefutable. And I don't know if I wasn't even buying that. I was like, I don't know. Like, it's just too far removed, and I also don't care, right? So it was kind of like that. And by the way, it wasn't even in a negative sense either. It wasn't like a reaction to. It wasn't still in relationship to Jesus, just in a negative way. It wasn't like, oh, don't give me that. Like, nobody tried to drum it into me when I was a kid. It wasn't a reaction against it. Simply not in my system. And I know it sounds like I'm beating a dead horse with this point, but like I really want to drive this point home. I know that this was not on my radar at all. I didn't care. That I was shown Jesus. I was shown that Jesus is real, exactly how he appeared in the Bible, not metaphorically, not kind of like what you believe is the Messiah to be. No. Jesus Christ, exactly how he appeared. And I was shown that there is this larger picture that is beyond the story that is being told to us in the Bible, which is the thing that always makes Christians feel uncomfortable. They like the Jesus bit, but they don't like the idea that there's something beyond that. They go, oh, no, that's blasphemy, right? Well, I definitely was shown that there's a bigger picture than that. However, the more I speak about it, the more I'm noticing what might be relevant or brings value and what is just maybe not really adding much and just creates more questions unnecessarily. Like, it's okay to have more questions, but if it doesn't really do much for us, then I'm not sure how relevant it is. So I'm slowly fading that bigger part out of the story because I'm not sure it has relevance to our current stage of evolution as humanity. What I was shown, though, is that we definitely live in some kind of a created space, and it is part of some kind of a tri-system. It wasn't very clear to me, but it was like a 3-body system. One of the things in the 3 bodies was our multiverse, and then the other 2 were, I wasn't even clear what they were. But then I was shown that we, each and every one of us, are sitting alone in our own simulated environment, and what executes behind the algorithm is the Mandelbrot set. So it's according to the fractal of the Mandelbrot set is how realities kind of paint themselves for you. And you are navigating it to some degree. So the things that make the most sense to you is the thing that's going to unfold. But for all intents and purposes, you are alone in your own simulation, and everybody else are just basically projections. But they also exist in their own simulation. So the people that you see as avatars in yours, they are still real, just in their own realities. And as you alluded to earlier, what opens the channel to meet the real people versus their projections is the channel of love. So like when you enter into the space of love, then all of a sudden you're being transported into a shared space together where it's like a safe channel where you can actually communicate with the real person. Then I was shown that Jesus was ascending, that he was going up in some way. And what I got from it is that basically there's a transition happening in which we're handed back our karma. So Jesus took on himself our karma in his infinite love so we don't end up in the wrong place. And he said, here, all you got to do is pay me tribute and acknowledge that this was done for you in an infinite love and an infinite act of love. But now we're mature enough as a civilization to enter a period in which we are carrying our own karma collectively. We can't do it personally, but we can do it collectively. Now, again, like I said, if for Christians that I've spoken to about this, that they obviously really like the Jesus bit, but they don't care for all the other things because it sounds like, you're still kind of trying to reinvent the wheel or reformulate the Jesus story a little bit. I can assure you, as somebody recently voiced this to me in a very kind way, they didn't mean it in any mean way, but they said, it feels like, that person saying to me, they said, it feels like when you're telling the technical story, the science story, I'm interested, and then you're adding this whole Jesus bit, and I don't know if you need to do that. It just feels a little bit like you're trying to drive some kind of an agenda there. So obviously, to anybody who doesn't know me, that's you don't know until you don't know, right? But to the extent that my word carries any realness to anyone now in real time, I can tell you, there's no, as far as I can tell, I have no agendas. Like, it's not like, I'm not saying anything behind what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I'm reporting directly, exactly what I saw. I don't have an interest in it being the case. In fact, if anything, it made me very uncomfortable because when they showed me this, it wasn't shown to me under the banner of, let us show you a movie about the stuff you guys believe. No, they were like, oh, you want to know how everything works? Well, let us show you a diagram with arrows exactly where everything fits. And in it, Jesus was real. It made me uncomfortable because, hey, wait, what do you mean? Like, oh, like for real? Like, that changes everything, right? Because if that's real, that says certain things. Like, you better align yourself with certain things, right? But it wasn't even the fear factor there. It was more like, it's a complete reframing of my ontology, and that always feels very uncomfortable. Like, I guess I'm in the business of pushing ontology outwards. I'm saying, hey, all the stuff that you guys are talking about theoretically, I know it's real, and here's why I know it's real. And when you're saying it and you already did the work of coming to terms with it, it's much easier than it is being on the receiving end, needing in real time to try and kind of like maybe accept it, maybe not accept it. Why should I accept it? Like all these questions. Because when you're settled in your perception of the world, that's safety, that's comfort. And especially when the story like the Jesus story is attached to it, because the Jesus story has ultimate implications to it. It's not just like a give or take. Like the one thing that people I think don't fully appreciate about Christianity is that, and I'm using this word provocatively only to drive a point home. I'm not using it as an insult at all, just to be clear. It's a very extreme religion in that there's no negotiation here. So Christians would do everything, because that's what the teaching says, to basically do everything they can to stay humble and kind and loving, so you can come in the presence of God and you can open your heart so you don't end up in the wrong place. But ultimately, there's no negotiation. It's either Jesus or nothing, baby. Like that's the teaching. There's no. I actually had this conversation yesterday with a friend of mine, and she was describing things in terms of very kind of like modern spiritual terms, and she was trying to see if we can fold that and maybe help map them on the same space with the Jesus story. And I said, well, we can do some some acrobatics around some areas of it, but ultimately they're incompatible. There's no. You're not in the Jesus story. You're not God. You're not it. And there's no. It's very clear. It's not. Jesus said he's the Son of God, but so are you. That's not true. That's not according to canonical Christianity. Like, it's not true at all. So there's a big difference there. And the reason that, so knowing that, if the hyperspace being showed me that Jesus is real, they showed me this just like they showed me all the other things that I'm taking seriously. So if I have to be consistent, I either take everything they're telling me with some seriousness, or I take none of it. Now, obviously, there's gradation, of course, but that part really, it really hit me hard. What I would say, however, and this is where I'm humbling myself, and I'm not pretending to. This is already kind of like my way of dealing with it. Let's just say. One thing I will say to Christians, and I've said this before on one podcast, I think I said, one thing, if I have to speak to you and try and reason with you, I would say that maybe there needs to be a little bit of a toning down of this lack of negotiation on your part, because the real ultimate truth of things, if somebody is living an ethical life, because for some Christians, if you ask them, like, well, what happens to somebody who lived a completely ethical life but never heard of Jesus? Well, going to hell, sorry. It's the reason it doesn't make any sense is because ultimately I believe that if somebody truly lives a fully ethical life, what that means is that they're always living open, with an open heart towards the truth and the source and light. So if at the end of time Jesus comes to them and says it's time, even if they've never heard of Jesus, not from any Christian or anyone else, it doesn't matter, because their heart is open, so they can't not accept the truth. And if they would see in that moment that that is the truth, they will accept it, and that's okay. It's all good. So if I have to say something to some Christians that kind of insist that it's their mission to just drive that point home, I would tone it down a little bit, because I can tell you from someone who's on the other end of this and hearing this from people sometimes, it definitely feels more like the mafia than that you care about them. It's like,
Yeah.
hey, we love you. You might want to accept what we're saying, because you don't want to know. You don't want to find out what happens if you don't listen to me. It's more of a wise guy kind of move than an actual act of compassion. So that part, I think, needs to be just in the cultural conversation, needs to be brought down a little bit, because I mean, and especially if you are truly fully devout Christian, I'm sure you know that it's all already, the plan is perfect. So like, don't worry about it too much, right? Let's say you put it, but just don't do that. But now, the reason I said I take this with a very cautionary act of wording, just put it that way, is because after I was shown that, a window opened in my mind that never existed before. Then maybe, fortunately or unfortunately, maybe reality is this way, and it's just not negotiable. That's why I'm kind of like putting it up as with a quite a lot of respect, and I'm not saying that I cracked the what it needs to be, but that's the Jesus bit that I was shown that he's real and that it's not nothing as I previously considered in Christianity. There's something there that is very fundamental.
It's really refreshing to know that I'm not the only person on the planet that was asking these questions years ago. Like, what happens to the people that live on Easter Island that didn't know about this stuff and they burn? Like, what am I doing here? Like, why am I grinding and gnashing? Danny, how do people get a hold of you and find your work?
Best ways is my two main channels, YouTube, Dango Thoughts, DANGO Thoughts, 3 words. And on Spotify, my show is called 0 to 1 with Danny Goler, from Earthbound Lines to Cosmic Citizens, which is going to be focusing much more on the how do we get to the next level of our evolution. And you can check out our website, codeofreality.com. One thing I do want to add about the whole question of hell, what became very apparent to me at this point, and again, I think at this point we don't have to offer the caveat every time that we're constantly learning and nobody's here pretending to ultimately know all the things. But one thing that at least currently is very clear to me is that people think that hell is a punishment, but I think that at this point it's clear to me that hell is essentially the norm. It is what happens when you just do whatever. So like in the infinite scope of things, if there's no intention, there's no like attempt to, in Hebrew it's called tikkun olam, the correction of the world, which actually is like the correction of ourselves. So if there's no attempt towards the good, the default is evil. The default is just whatever, and eventually it devolves into insanity. And we see some of it now. And I think what hell really is just that you become outside of God's awareness. That is hell. Because you're essentially now in the infinite trajectory to nowhere. And there's only one central column of correctness that has to do with certain attitudes you employ as you move through your own evolution, that keeps you within the bound of that leads you kind of like towards this place that you're infinitely safe within the light, within the love, within all the things that we would deem positive. A place from which questions like, what do you even mean by good? Don't even make sense. Because of course like if you have to ask that question, there's already a part of you that is lost. Because that is, as Sam Harris once brilliantly put it, it's like that's when you hit let me see if I can recapitulate it exactly. The hit rock bottom with the shovel of a stupid question. So it's just like if you don't know what horrible experiences are, and you have to like if you think you have to define what bad feels like, you are already confused about something. You don't need to define it. That is the most basic understanding that a conscious being can have. That there's a big difference between things that aiming towards the suffering part for no other reason but the suffering itself, and the thing that is trying to be constructive, trying to aim towards something that builds, unifies. It's true that you can't definitionally put your finger on it, but that's also true about experience itself. You can't really define consciousness. I mean, you can try, but you can't really define it for what it is, like infinite perception. And yet, it's the one thing you don't need to define, because you have it. It's the one N of one that you never have to explain to anyone who has it, because it's just, this is it. This is the definition of what this is. And I think that's a really big emphasis for me. So the way that I so far folded this whole experience I've had with Jesus and all the previous ideas I've had about the world is that we're all sitting somewhere in relationship to it. And we don't have to worry as long as the next foot forward we're placing is our best foot. So like if we really did our best, even if we fail, because we will, we're just that's the nature of it. But if we truly tried and acknowledged where we failed and acknowledged that we failed, even if it's because of a weakness we had, by the way, I was like, I know I shouldn't have done that. And even then I knew I shouldn't have done that. And I still did that. It's okay. Like as long as you're trying and still aiming with your heart and your mind there, you don't have to worry about a thing. And I know the Christians would disagree with that, but I strongly believe that the infinite goodness that exists in reality will not allow beings that truly are trying to end up in the wrong place.
Ladies and gentlemen, Danny Goler.